Hey, my name's Sam, and I've got some pretty good news. I picked up a 2021 Subaru Impreza WRX, and I figure what better way to break it in than to ruin the warranty by lowering it. Let's hop right into it. So, jumping into today's project, I am unboxing these H&R lowering springs. These springs are going to lower the car approximately 1 inch, probably just under, but I think it is going to accomplish my goals for exactly what I want this car to do. Now it's going to be mainly a daily driver, so you can see me jacking up the car here and taking off the wheels. And when you're doing this, take notice of where the lock nut is located compared to the valve stem. It should be directly across from it. Subaru balances their wheels from the factory slightly off center to account for the different size lug nut, from what I understand. Once we have all the wheels off, we open the hood so that we have access to all the nuts that are holding on the top hats. And we also disassemble the trunk and get rid of all the unnecessary carpet and items in the back. As you start to get to the point of needing to take out the side carpets, there's going to be 3 clips on the sides, and then there's 2 up top that I forgot to point out here, and then there's also 3 that are on the back plastic that you need to pull out. Now I sent my first clip into outer space by pulling too hard, and what you really need to do is position the tool in between the white plastic and the gray plastic and then pull the top piece out, and that is what is going to allow you to not send this thing flying across the room when you pull it out. Once those side panels are out, you should have access to the top bolts for the strut, and you're good to start unbolting everything underneath the car. Now there's going to be 3 main bolts that we're going to undo. You've got your pivot bolt, which is going to be on the far right, your strut bolt, your end link for the sway bar, and then the subframe bolt, which is going to be the final bolt that allows the whole arm to swing down so that you can get the strut out. Working underneath the car, I'm just using an impact wrench with a regular wrench on the other side to hold the actual stud so that it doesn't spin while I'm using the impact, and then I'm just pushing the stud out so that it just falls down. Now this is an extremely easy process. Most of the time you don't even need a hammer to get these out. As you can see, I just use my ratchet to tap it through, and then I'm having a little bit of issue from the strut pushing down on it, but after a little bit of persuasion it finally pops out. Now that I've got all these bolts out, I'm able to move into the inside of the car and remove the top bolts from the strut. Now when you're doing this, I would recommend folding down the back seat and not just letting it drop like I did, but either way works just fine. Now moving on to the front, you only have 3 bolts to undo on the strut side, and it is going to be the camber bolt, the strut bolt, the brake bolt, and then there's also another clip on the other side. But you want to pay special attention to where the camber bolt is located, because that is what's going to set your camber of your wheel. So in order to prevent myself from going to the alignment shop, I just marked on the bolt itself and the strut so that when I put it back together, everything would line up just right. Now once again, all I'm using is an impact wrench on the bolts and then just knocking the actual stud through so that I can drop it. And once I have all of the bottom bolts done, I'm good to do the top 3 bolts and drop the strut out and start changing the springs. Now as you're starting to think about rebuilding the strut, you want to take a look at the top hat and the strut and make sure they're at the exact same angle, because if you don't, it will not be straight and everything will be a little bit messed up. So you can take this apart with just an impact. You don't need the spring compressors. It's not under a ton of spring pressure, as you'll see here in a second. The little washer up top is holding it tight, and all I need to do is grab a screwdriver and wedge it off. and it does shoot a little bit, but it's not anything like some of the other springs that are under a ton of pressure. I don't know if this next part is totally necessary, but I took the rubber pieces from the springs to put on the new ones because I don't ever want to hear the sound of rubbing metal as I hit bumps. So I'm playing it safe rather than being sorry later down the line and having to take it apart again and finally put that rubber piece in to prevent the metal scraping noises. Now lining this up, you want to make sure you put it back together the same way you took it apart. And I set the nut in the top, and all I did was push down with all of my weight and start spinning the socket until the nut got started, and then I finished it off with the impact. Now this is easier said than done. It took me a few tries to finally get it, but after a little while of finessing, it finally went in. So rebuilding these front struts is all fine and dandy, but you are going to need a little bit of a special tool for the back ones. You're going to need a pass-through socket, which will allow you to put the Allen key inside of that socket so that you can hold the strut from spinning. Now what I am doing is just holding the Allen key in one hand and then undoing the nut with the socket in the other hand. As you disassemble the rear strut, you get to this bump stop and you need to take approximately 20 millimeters, which is close to an inch, off of it, and that lines up to be right in that divot. So what I did was I took a multi-tool and just cut it off and slowly worked my way around it until it popped off. When you're putting this back together, you want to make sure that the top bolts line up with how the holes are on the bottom, because if they're offset, then it's not going to line up right when you go to put it back in the car. You can see here that I have it slightly off, and I was able to finesse it while it was still put together, but it would have been a lot easier if I had just lined them up from the start. Once all the strut assemblies were put back together, I just reversed this whole process and made sure everything went back together in the correct way, and it was a super easy process to put back together. Definitely a lot easier than taking it apart. Now once I got it back on the ground, I took a comparison picture, and this is how it turned out before, and this is it after. I hope you liked the video, and I had a ton of fun doing this project, and if you're going to try this at home, I hope that you learned something by watching this video. It's super easy, anyone can definitely do it. You need a couple special tools, but it's nothing you can't find at Harbor Freight for nice and cheap. So if you like this video, make sure you click that like button and subscribe for future videos, and I will catch you in the next one.